On today's Technobabble, it's our 10-year anniversary!
This is Tech No Babble, your weekly source for church video and graphics news, perspectives, tips, and tricks. And now here's your host, Paul Clifford.
Hi, and welcome again to Technobabble. This is the show where every week I help you with church video and graphic design. My name is Paul Allen Clifford. I'm your host. I'd love for you to join the conversation, leave your comments, etc. So if you're watching the video, which most of you are, just do that below the video. If you're one of the few people that have listened to me, for 10 years now, then you can't leave a comment below the video because you're listening to the audio. So no harm, no foul, no problem. Just head over to trinitydigitalmedia.com/contact, and there you can leave your comment or hit me up on Twitter, Paul Allen Cliff, PaulAlanclif, or you can always just drop me a line on email, paul@trinitydigitalmedia.com. So 10 years ago, I had this idea. You see, I did radio in college, and I really enjoyed it, but I didn't have access to an FM transmitter anymore. So I was trying to figure out how I would do something like that, but do it today, in the more modern way. That's when I stumbled across podcasting. So I was a big fan of Leo Laporte and the whole gang that were on the Screensavers, which was on Tech TV. And so I decided that I'd try and figure out where they were, what they were doing, and they were podcasting. Now, when I first figured this out, it was hard to listen to podcasts. First off, there were only a couple of podcatchers out there. Downloading the audio was not an easy task. But still, I thought, this is a revolution. We have the ability to create a radio station right now and do it over the internet. So I thought, well, let's start this. So I created Tech No Babble. Now the name, I was brainstorming different ideas. I came up with like 100 different names, and I know I came up with at least 26 because I came up with one for every letter of the alphabet, plus several more. So I wanted something kind of clever and catchy, and Technobabble, that's a phrase meaning talking about technology in kind of jargony terms, but I wanted kind of a pun, so I went with tech, short for technology, no, comma, Babel, as in the Tower of Babel. So that's a cautionary tale about when we let technology become our God. So I wanted it to be tech, but without the implications of the Tower of Babel, where we let technology become our God instead of letting God be our God. So that's where the name came from. So I went to the churchmedia.net first annual. Turns out it was only 2 of them, but the national convention, and I didn't tell anyone that I had this idea, but I started it shortly thereafter. So let's listen to a clip from the very first episode, the pilot episode of Tech No Babble.
There you are. You finally convinced your church's leadership that this tech stuff is the way to go. In fact, you've got the right equipment. You sit staring at your edit bay. You realize you don't know what to do with it. You know the how, but not the what.
So, sounds a little different, I know. I was kind of talking in a radio voice, very deep and mysterious. And I was reading. And it wasn't long until I quit doing that and started just making bullet points and speaking off the cuff. And I think that that's more natural. It's something that is more interactive. So that's what I did from there on out. So fast forward to a few years, I had some starts and stops, some hits and misses. I say this is the 10-year anniversary, but I haven't been podcasting for all 10 years. As it turns out, I took a year off here, I did this. This show has pod faded more than once and come back. So it's not the case that it's always been the same. Originally, my idea was to have 3 segments, starting out with news and then an opinion and then tips and tricks. So when you hear the opening, your weekly source for church video graphics, news, perspectives, tips, and tricks. Those were 3 distinct segments, and over time that just became the kind of stuff we're going to talk about. So I'd also like to show you the very first video episode of Technobabble. Now, if you're listening to the audio, you can't see the video, but that's okay because there's not really much to see. But this started probably about 5 years ago when I started TrinityDigitalMedia.com as a company. When I was serious about it, I'd worked for a local AV firm that did whole house audio video, and they decided that Kentucky was not a good place to be, so they moved to California. They've since moved twice since, but anyway, so they gave me a generous severance package, and I used that money to start this company. So this is the very first episode that I did on video.
From the TrinityDigitalMedia.com studios, it's Technobabble. On today's Technobabble, podcasting church, upcoming plans, what was old is new again, and much, much more.
Well, that was interesting, I bet. Video wasn't great. It was all SD. It was before I bought the camera I'm using now, and it just wasn't great. I don't think I had very good lighting. There were a few things like that. So I progressed on, and as I'm doing this, eventually I got an invitation from a church live streaming company to do live streaming through them, and then another, and then another. As it turns out, live streaming was something that churches were starting to get into. So I started live streaming. So here's a little piece of my first live streaming podcast from a couple of years ago. On today's Technobabble, turning a DSLR into a live cam. Well, I hope that was interesting. When I first started live streaming, it was just one camera, me. I was encoding it with my MacBook Pro using Adobe Flash Media Live Encoder, and I hope I've gotten better over the years. But it was kind of a fun adventure, and that fun adventure led me to where I'm writing a live streaming article or 2 every month for Church Production Magazine. So it's really been instrumental in what I'm doing here at TrinityDigitalMedia.com. In fact, I just had an interview on a podcast which will release in August, and we talked all about live streaming, and I owe that all to this podcast, Technobabble. So where do I see this going from here? You know, I've always wanted to do something like the screensavers. So if you go to twit.tv right now, there's a show called The New Screensavers, which is very similar to the show that kind of sparked my imagination. So right now I'm still working in my home studio. My home studio is the largest it's ever been, but I'm still working in it. And I think that it's, we've only got room to grow. That eventually I'll have a dedicated studio space, which is not also my office. I'm thinking eventually there will be 2 or 3 of us that do segments on this show. And I'd love to have it daily and streaming and just the perfect vehicle to help churches learn more about video, graphic design, and all the church tech stuff. So that's where I'd like to go eventually. But right now, it's still a small little thing 10 years later. And hopefully, in 10 years, when I'm 51, wow, that's kind of hard to fathom. In 10 years, when I'm 51, this will be fully self-supporting. I won't be doing any more freelance, and you'll see just some really, really high production values. So I hope that helped you. If you like this show, and this is a little atypical, but if you like this show, by all means, go subscribe to my email newsletter. That's located at trinitydigitalmedia.com/gifts, GIFTS. There I've got some church tech gifts for you if you sign up for the newsletter. And the newsletter itself is free. So you'll get all sorts of tips and tricks, news, things that you need to know to do tech in church. And you'd probably like some of the stuff I sell at my store too. So that's located at trinitydigitalmedia.com/store. And there you can find some resources that I've created with you in mind. So head over there, and I think you'll find that there are some things that are going to make you more efficient, save you time, and enable you to spend more time with your family and doing ministry to help change lives and eternities. Until next time, this is Paul Allen Clifford with trinitydigitalmedia.com. Go out and change eternity.